Hello and welcome back to Sullivan County 4-H Learn by Doing Beginner Watercolor series, and today we're going to work on a winter landscape scene, and we're going to be learning some different techniques that we do in the winter time, as well as typical colors that you see in winter schemes, and a really fun kind of secret watercolor tip that should be really fun to do. So we're gonna start like how we always start, with our horizon. And again, I never make my horizon in the middle, but you always make it nice and straight as possible. So there we go. And in this scene, we're going to incorporate a couple of different techniques that we've already gone over so that we can practice them. So what I am going to do is have a little bit of a island here, little shoreline. So this is going to be water, and then we're going to do another kind of shore here. So it's going to be less water than we've done before, but just a little bit. So we have kind of this nice little island over here, and then this river. Okay, and on this island we're gonna have some grasses, a few pine trees, and then on this side, one of our big focal points is going to be a nice deciduous tree. Okay, so that's enough to give us an idea of where we want things to be. So that's pretty much it for the sketch for this one. Like I said, usually watercolor sketches are pretty minimal. So we're gonna go ahead and get started. And the first thing we're going to do, like usual, is wet our background first. It's gonna be a nice soft background. So I'm going to wet all the way down to the horizon line, to where the water starts. And now we're going to start with some of our background colors, and these are going to be more subdued. In this painting, I want there to be kind of like a little snowstorm going on, so it'll be much more subdued colors for it. So right now I'm mixing up some Payne's Gray along with a little bit of Prussian Blue. Kind of make a slate gray color. I'm just going to start sweeping that across my paper. What I like to do whenever I do kind of like stormy winter scenes like this is I like to add just a tiny bit of very dark purple to it, because you kind of see that a lot in winter storms. So I like to just kind of add a streak of color into that. And I like to upsweep it a little bit just to give a little bit of movement to the sky. now, while this is still wet, I want some soft trees because I want them to look like they're in a snowstorm. So I'm going to do a mixture of some different techniques. I'm going to use the pine tree technique that we already did last time, and I'm also going to paint some pine trees that have a little bit more of a unique shape to them. But again, I'm going to be working more in the gray tones rather than brown for this painting. So I'm mixing like a forest green, a little bit of burnt umber, and some Payne's gray to get this green color. Okay. I want the trees to be nice and soft, in the background kind of trees. So I just made kind of a trunk with that, and now I'm just gonna go, and this is how I do trees that I want to have kind of a little more holes in them, if you will, not so perfect trees. It adds a little bit of variety of texture to the piece, I think. So when I'm working with more open trees, I tend to use that technique. So now, what I'm going to do, just add a little bit of kind of like soft underbrushes to this also, just to round out the piece. And now we're going to do that really fun technique that I was talking about before, and we're going to take kosher salt, and we're going to, while the paper is still wet, put this right on. And you'll see the salt is absorbing the color, and if we did this in time where the paper is still wet enough, so this is very sensitive to how wet your paper is, it might be the tiniest bit on the dry side for this technique, but you'll see a really fun thing happens when you use salt. So I'm just going to give a good layer over the whole piece. And now we kind of have to give the salt time to do its thing. So we're not going to hit this with a hairdryer yet. We're not going to dry anything. We just are going to give the salt some time to work. And then we will dry it and take off any salt that still remains. We'll brush off. So now we're just going to give that a minute to do its thing. Here is a close-up on what the salt is doing right now. It's been probably about 2 minutes, and you can see that the salt is absorbing the color from the watercolor paper, so it's going to give us some really neat looking snowflakes. So that is just a little close-up view on what the salt is working on right now. It's not quite ready to dry yet, but we are getting there. Okay, so there we go, all finished with the salt. When I was happy with the level that the salt had absorbed the water, I just hit it with a hairdryer to stop the process from happening and to dry everything where it was. So once you do that, the salt will stop absorbing color. And then I just took a little eraser, because the salt does stick to the paper when it dries, and I just scrape the salt off. So that is all done, and you can see this technique versus the technique we used last week and the first time that we did painting to kind of fuzz out the background. This one here, you can see the techniques, the results are different. This one is with the water and this one is with salt, and the one with salt tends to just be a little bit more defined, usually stay concentrated, and have kind of slightly harder edges, I guess you could say, to the end result. But in the cases like this snowstorm, we kind of want that effect as opposed to larger, really soft dots. So this is, and it's also just fun to do. So that is another technique to have under your belt. And now what we're going to do is we're going to work on this little island piece here, and then we'll move to our little river. So how we're gonna handle that section is we are going to kind of just put into anchor, because we have this super soft background now with these trees. We're gonna anchor this, but not want to paint too much of our technique over. We're just gonna stick with some low-lying grasses and things of that nature on this shoreline so that it doesn't distract from this, but yet your eye still has a place to anchor so it doesn't look weird. So we are going to use some for that we are going to use some yellow ochre for the grass and some burnt umber as well. And I'm also going to slightly anchor the ground with just a little bit of sepia brown. We're gonna kind of go along the shoreline and just kind of anchor it a little bit. This will kind of look like earth poking through the snow when we're done with it. Okay. Again, we're not going to put too much detail on this portion of it. It's more of an acre. So now I'm going to do the grass on top with my trusty grass brush. I'm going to do again yellow ochre, a little bit of burnt sienna, or burnt umber rather, and then a touch of sepia. Grass isn't going to be too big. And then just soften the edges out a little bit. I've added a little bit more burnt umber to the color now to give a slight differentiation, so it's not the same color all the way across, and we get a little bit of depth to the picture as well. We can drag some of that color to from the grass down onto the shore as well to kind of complement that color a little bit. If your paper is already dry to the point where it won't run down itself like it did over here, you can just kind of take your finger and smudge it down. But be careful how you touch the paper, because if you leave your finger there too long, the oils from your finger will leave a mark. And it's starting to rain, so you might hear that come up on the audio. Alright, so that's just kind of our soft background, and just taking the opportunity to show you another technique. If I look back at this, I got a little bit careful with where you point your water, because I just got a little bit of orange in my sky. I don't want that. If I look back at this and I decide, you know, that's kind of like too dark in color, that's darker than I want, I can take my brush, add a little bit of color to that area, and then remove some of the intensity of color also. And then, of course, if I wanted to make it darker, I could put more paint on it. But you have to, the paint has to be at a certain level of not too dry, not too wet, in order for that to work. And that was pretty much the perfect level. If you can move it with your finger, the color with your finger, most likely that technique will work to remove a little bit of color also, if need be. Alright, so that is it for our little shoreline. And now what we're going to do is we're going to go back in and define this snowy bank a little bit more when we do our water. So we're going to do that now, and because this needs to be more wet for when we do reflections and such like that, we are going to wet that area before we do anything. And I'm going to take care to go around my bank, because I do want part of that to stay white. And I'm going to go right through the tree with this color, because the tree is going to be darker than the water is. Now this water, in a lot of winter scenes, you'll see if it's more like a lot of snow and it's very bright out, like you have a really bright blue sky, because typically the skies in wintertime are very, very bright colored. You'll notice that water in those paintings are often pretty much nearly black, and that does actually happen. If you've ever come across a little creek or a stream in the wintertime and really take a look at it, the water is so very dark. But our water today is not going to reflect that, because we have these colors in the sky and it's snowing, so there's different lightings at play here. So we are going to have color in our water. It's not going to be dark, but if we do another winter painting, you might see that technique come out. So we're going to complement in this water the colors that we used in our sky, just like we did the first time that we did a reflection painting. So I'm going to start again with that blue. And I'm just going to follow the same technique that we used that first class. Okay, so to save a little time on this video, I went ahead and did the water just the same way that we went over in the last time we did the lake picture. So I just copied the colors next to each other and across from each other, and then under where the reflection should be, I did very light drag downs of the same color, and then just sucked out a little bit of color here and there for a nice flat effect. So now what we're going to do is we're going to work on this foreground, our final piece here, and we're going to do, we always paint lightest to dark, so the first thing we're going to do is give some definition to the snow that's right here on this bank. to do that, we're going to actually put some color on the snow, which sounds kind of counterintuitive, but when you paint snow, if you were just to leave this all perfectly white with no definition to it or shadowing on it, it would make it look kind of flat. So this will give us a little bit of texture in that snow, and it will also just help give depth to the painting overall. So the colors that we usually use for something like that are blues and purples, sometimes some light grays. So we're going to stay in that same kind of suit. So we're going to do a Prussian blue with a tiny bit of Payne's gray. We're going to make it a nice light color. And we're not going to paint the whole snowbank. We're just going to soften it a little bit. Just add some definition here and there. And again, if you do this and you decide that you have too much color on your snow and you want to take some of the intensity of it out, or just to add another layer of depth to it, you can take highlights out the same way that we do the water. You just take a clean brush that you wet first, pat it off with a paper towel, and then you can suck out color. It won't take all the color out, the paper won't return to white, but it'll definitely make it a lot lighter. So just like that, and then I am gonna do just another right in front of that color with a little bit of similar to that purple color that we were working with before. Kind of like a eggplant color almost. So Prussian blue with alizarin crimson and a tiny bit of Payne's gray. Just to take that white corner out there so that it doesn't distract. I don't want the eye to see any harsh white corners, because that will draw the eye from the rest of the paper, which we don't want. Like that. So now there's some texture, there's a little bit of interest, it holds your eye, gives some definition, and that's really all we need it to do. So now what we're going to do is we're going to kind of give this a little bit more grounding. So I'm going to go ahead and add some grass all along this embankment, kind of like we did here, but more defined, a little harder than the ones that we did over here, because of course it's closer to you, so it's going to be more clear. And I'm going to go right through the tree when I do this because I want it to look consistent, and my tree is going to be darker anyway, so I don't have to worry about that. And I'm using the same colors as before for the grass that we did on the embankment. So, now that that's done, you can also, to anchor it so the color isn't so harsh right on the edge of that, every once in a while you can go back in and do one of those, just like we did on the shoreline, just dragging some of that color into the snow so it looks like it's slightly unburied earth. So now we're going to focus on the part of the painting that's going to be right smack in focus, and that is going to be this tree here, this deciduous tree that we have. And the color of it is going to be fairly dark because it is a winter scene, so we're going to want it to be pretty dark, but there is going to be kind of like a light side and a dark side to it so that you can see the difference. So we're going to use burnt sienna. And some sepia brown. Touch of Payne's gray. Alright, and with Deciduous Trees, we always paint in the direction that it grows. That is a tiny bit wet, so I'm gonna hit this with a hairdryer real quick just to make sure that my tree doesn't get all fuzzy. Now we're gonna do. So we're gonna start at the trunk. You can see that this is pretty dark, but we can always kind of add some water to make the paint go a little further, and it lightens it too. I like to kind of like the effect that we used before. Make sure that your trunk looks anchored, and then especially in winter pictures I like to drag some color down so that it looks like the snow is going up into the tree. And then this is the thickness we're just going to start taking from. So I've determined that this is the dark side and this is the light side of my tree, and I'm going to follow that suit. So I'm going to take my first branch off this way. And there is no really perfect rule in making a deciduous tree. You just want to make sure that you pick up your hand as you go so it looks like it it naturally gets skinnier towards the twigs, and you want to be sure that it doesn't have an obvious pattern to it. And that it's not perfectly symmetrical. Going with our trunk. And you just kind of keep working this way until you feel it's time to take another branch off the tree. These trees definitely take some practice, so get discouraged if it takes you a little bit of practice to really figure out how you like to do them for as far as your preference. I've seen people do deciduous trees in many different ways. That's why I said there's no real method in doing them. It's just what you like and the way that you believe makes it look the most believable. But definitely lots of practice with these guys. I'm gonna start kind of teeing off the top of my tree here. And when you first are doing trees, if you do want to sketch out a more thought out plan for your tree beforehand and really put a sketch together on where you're going to have your branches and where you're going to start and stop, you can absolutely do that. And that is when you're first learning how to do them. It's a good tool to use if you really put more detail into your tree that you're sketching. You can definitely do that if that just makes it a little easier for you. Go ahead and do that. Alright, so that's going to be the form of the tree. There might be some instances where I go back in and add a branch where I think it might be appropriate. But part of making deciduous trees is to know when to stop adding branches, because you can overdo something a little bit. So definitely err on that side. And of course, if you kind of need to step back for a minute, you can. Sometimes it helps me to put the painting away from myself so I can see it from a distance too. That definitely helps. So now I'm just going back in and I'm adding a little more definition to the shaded part of my tree. Wherever a branch comes off, I make sure that the top part of it shows some light and the under part of it is shaded, at least a little. Doesn't have to be so detailed that it really draws your eye to that spot, but just enough where it doesn't look flat. Alright, so that is pretty much it on our tree. I'm just going to make this leader branch a little darker. And it's okay if you cross, especially when there's no leaves on the tree. It's totally okay if you cross some of the branches, because in nature, unless you're dealing with painting a pruned tree, this is what branches do. They cross each other all the time, they weave into each other, so it does add kind of a degree of depth to the painting as well when you have that also. Okay, so I'm gonna stop because I'm gonna add too many branches to that tree, and instead what I'm going to do is take our lovely little, what we usually use as a grass brush, and I'm going to mix up the same paint color, have it just a tiny bit warmer. So also adding some burnt umber in there just to give it a slightly warmer hue. And then I'm going to put, just to kind of make this area look more complete, I'm going to put a sapling over here. Okay, so just adding a little bit of interest there as well. And now we're just going to ground these trees a little bit by just adding a tiny bit of shadow underneath them, using some very, very washed down Payne's Gray. Just like that, just to give them a little more area in the ground. If you wanted to, you can add some more little brush around them. You could even add berries to one of these if you wanted to make it kind of like an everberry little tree. You could put some pine trees in here. Really, you can adapt this any way that you would want to, just like how we discuss in every one of these classes that we do. So now I'm going to give you a close-up on this. Okay, so there you have it, our winter scene complete with kosher salt provided snowflakes. So I hope that you enjoyed this video. I hope that you will have fun trying out these new techniques that I have shown you today. And for more project ideas, don't forget to subscribe to Cornell Cooperative Extension Sullivan County Facebook page, Instagram, and YouTube. And for more information about Sullivan County 4-H, check out the link provided below. And also, don't forget that upcoming very soon are still exhibit fair entries. So if you're looking to show any of your paintings in the fair this year, make sure that you have those entries in by August 1st. As always, happy painting!